Way out on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, there's this island, and its location has made it an absolute prize for, well, millennia. Seriously, we're talking a trading hub, a military outpost, a cultural crossroads, and it's been fought over by pretty much every major power you can think of. This is the story of Cyprus, the island that, it seems, everyone wanted.
Okay, but before we get into all the empires and the battles and all that heavy stuff, let's start with something, well, kind of charming, actually. Get this. Cyprus is home to the oldest known evidence of a pet cat. I'm talking a grave, a human buried with their cat, dating back 9,500 years. So as we go through this island's super long history, just do me a favor and picture cats just everywhere.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this incredible story. First, we'll look at the one thing that put Cyprus on the map in the first place. Then we're going to race through the long list of empires that conquered it. After that, we'll dive into its really unique religious history, and finally, we'll see how the modern divided island we know today actually came to be.
Okay, let's kick things off. Our story begins in an age where having the right kind of rock could literally make you a global superpower. And for Cyprus, that rock was green. You know, before humans even showed up, Cyprus was home to some pretty wild residents. We're talking miniature elephants and hippos, tiny ones. Then the first people arrived and they brought along some more familiar animals, sheep, goats, and of course, those now famous cats. But for a really long time, the island was pretty quiet. Not many people lived there. That is, until traders from far away showed up looking for one very specific thing. So picture this. The Minoans from the island of Crete show up and start asking the locals about some, totally not valuable green rocks. And the Cypriots, they had tons of it. It was copper ore, the key ingredient for making bronze, which was the metal of the Bronze Age. All of a sudden, Cyprus was basically sitting on a gold mine. And this is just a perfect example of how one single resource can change absolutely everything. The copper trade just exploded. The island's population surged, and Cyprus was totally transformed into this wealthy, powerful hub in the eastern Mediterranean. And along the way, it soaked up a ton of influence from the very advanced Minoan civilization. So just how powerful are we talking? Well, get this. The local kingdom, which was known as Alashia, was so respected that its king addressed the Egyptian pharaoh as my brother. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but that title was only for the most powerful rulers. It basically put Cyprus on equal footing with the absolute giants of the age. But, of course, this golden age of independence wasn't going to last forever. Trade got all messed up by these mysterious raiders called the Sea Peoples. And not long after that, the mighty Hittite Empire swept in and conquered the island. And this right here set a pattern of foreign rule that would define Cyprus for the next 3,000 years.
And that brings us to the next phase of Cypriot history, which, honestly, is best described as a revolving door for the ancient world's greatest empires.
Seriously, the pace of conquest here was just dizzying. For centuries, it was this relentless cycle. First, you've got the mighty Assyrian Empire. Then, a resurgent Egypt takes over. Then the vast Persian Empire. Yeah, the local Cypriot kings tried to rebel, but they always failed. Alexander the Great swept through and nabbed the island. After he died, his general Ptolemy claimed it for his new kingdom back in Egypt. And then finally, in 58 BC, the Romans show up and pretty much just say, okay, our turn now.
And you know what? Roman rule brought something Cyprus hadn't seen in a very, very long time: stability. For nearly 700 years, the island was actually pretty peaceful and prosperous. And it was during this long period of calm that the Apostle Paul made Cyprus the very first stop on his missionary journeys, bringing a new faith that would spread like wildfire.
Okay, so as the Roman Empire eventually splits and new powers start to rise, Cyprus finds itself in a totally new role. It's now this strategic island caught right in the middle of the two great faiths of the medieval world, Christianity and Islam. And what's so fascinating is the really unique solution they came up with for Cyprus. I mean, think about it. On the mainland, the Christian Byzantine and the Arab Islamic empires were locked in almost constant warfare. But for the island, they agreed to this incredible treaty. They decided they would rule it jointly, and they'd split all the tax money right down the middle, 50-50. And this amazing deal kept the peace on Cyprus for over 250 years. Well, that peace completely shattered with the Crusades. England's Richard the Lionheart came along and conquered the island, but he found it was just too rebellious to manage. So he decided to cash out.
He sold it to the Knights Templar. But when they couldn't handle all the rebellions either, they sold it again, this time to a deposed Crusader king, who set up a new French-led kingdom of Cyprus.
Eventually, that French Crusader kingdom kind of faded away, but Cyprus was just too valuable a prize to be left alone. So in 1489, the powerful merchant class from Venice took control. They turned the island into a key military and trading post. But a new superpower was rising in the east, and it had its eyes on their prize.
So this brings us to our final chapter. This is the one that connects that age of empires with the really complex political realities of today. This is the story of how modern Cyprus was forged.
That new superpower? It was the Ottoman Empire, and they did not come quietly. The Venetian defenders were faced with this just overwhelming invasion force. Some accounts say it swelled to over 200,000 soldiers. Can you even imagine? After a brutal, year-long siege, the island finally fell.
You know, Ottoman rule actually started out pretty well, but over the centuries, the island's economy just started to decline under the crushing weight of high taxes. And what does that lead to? Well, it led to a whole series of failed revolts and the birth of a modern independence movement, especially among the island's majority Greek-speaking population. So by 1878, the Ottoman Empire is in decline, and they make a deal. They hand over administration of Cyprus to another empire, the British, in exchange for protection against Russia. Then, fast forward to World War I, the Ottomans side with Germany, so what does Britain do? They just annex the island outright. And just like that, it's a formal British colony.
And this period really brought a deep divide in the local population to the surface. You had the Turkish Cypriot minority, who for the most part supported British rule. But then you had the Greek Cypriot majority, who were pushing harder and harder for independence. And these two opposing views, well, they would set the stage for the conflict to come.
So the 1950s saw violent revolts just erupt against the British, mainly fueled by the Greek Cypriot desire to unite with Greece. By 1960, Cyprus finally got its independence, but it was a really fragile peace. The tensions between the Greek and Turkish communities were still dangerously high. What followed was a complex decade of political crisis and violence between the communities, and it all culminated in 1974. First, a Greek-backed coup, which was immediately followed by a Turkish military invasion. The result? The island was split in two, with a UN ceasefire line drawn right down the middle.
And today, that line is still there, monitored by UN peacekeepers. The Republic of Cyprus in the south is a member of the European Union. The north, however, is recognized only by Turkey. Now, relations have slowly gotten better, but the island's future is still one of the world's most complex diplomatic puzzles.
When you look at the big picture, the pattern is crystal clear, isn't it? From the ancient Minoans looking for copper to the great empires of the modern world, the story of Cyprus has almost always been written by outsiders. So the big question that remains is this: will the island's own people finally get to write the next chapter themselves?